It is election day in Canada, so in this video, I'm going to go over the final polls and what they may tell us about potentially what could happen tonight, including a few odd questions that I found to be amusing, but we'll get there. So let me first start with this wall of incredible data. This is from Polling Canada that summarized all of the polls that are out, their final polls, and the Liberals are winning in all of them. So you can see here it ranges from +6 to +2, but every single pollster has the Liberals winning the popular vote. Now, I want to be clear. The popular vote, doesn't necessarily translate to seat projection, or I should say the leader in the popular vote doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to, that party will form government. But when it comes to the Liberals, it often does. As the way the conservative vote is concentrated, conservatives tend to need a few point advantage in the popular vote to be able to be in a position to form a government, whereas the Liberals have been able to win or have been able to form a government even when they've been down in the popular vote. But that said, this is where things currently stand with all the pollsters, but I want to dive into a couple of pollsters and what it shows us. So first, let me start with ECOS. Now, this is the last election. I want to show you this for a reason. 2021, where they predicted Liberals heading to form government, which they did. This was their final poll showing the Liberals sitting at 32.6%, though they do say here that they want to be judged on their likely voter model, which said 32.5. What was the result? 32.6%. They were bang on with their national results. Their likely voter model was 0.1 off. So they were down, or their prediction of the Conservatives was off. But the reason for that is because they overestimated the People's Party of Canada vote, which is the far-right party. They overestimated that. So they were saying, 9.5 here. It was actually down to 5% on voting day. And a lot of that vote, of course, went to the Conservatives. So they were off there, but they were bang on when it came to the Liberal vote. This time, what are they projecting? Liberal majority. So you see here, Liberals, they're projecting them to sit at 43.6% of the vote, with the Conservatives at 37.5%. This time, the People's Party of Canada is not really a factor. So the potential of that vote collapsing going to the Conservatives isn't there. So I expect their conservative projection here to be a little more accurate than last time, assuming things maintain. Of course, there may be an invisible conservative vote where the people that have never voted before are all going to come out to vote for the Conservatives. That, of course, can happen. So, but these are projections. This is the data that we see right now. Things, of course, can change, but this is how things currently look. And this projects out to be a seat total of 184 for the Liberals, which is a majority. Majority is 172. So anything above that is just gravy for the Liberals. So comfortably in a majority here. And the Conservatives at 133. The NDP vote collapsing completely down to only 6 seats. Bloc Québécois at 18 and Green Party at 2 seats. Now, they also showcase here the vote intention by region, which goes to show how they think the Liberals will be able to form their majority government, and that is largely dependent on Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Ontario. So all of these going in big numbers for the Liberals is a massive boon for them, and Alberta, not surprising, sitting at big support for the Conservatives there. Now, we look at the demographics. This is also very interesting. The men vote is favoring the Conservatives at 46 to 37 for the Liberals, and the women vote heavily favoring the Liberals, 51 to 31 for the Conservatives there. And by age is also very interesting. This may be a little surprising for, say, the American viewers here, but everybody essentially over the age of 35 is leaning liberal, and 65 plus is heavily favoring the Liberal Party, whereas under 35 is favoring, in a plurality, not a majority, but still plurality, favoring the Conservatives. Now, my guess as to why that is, actually, we'll get to more data from Abacus in a bit here, showcasing the exact reason, but it's affordability. So the affordability crisis, liberals have been in power for, almost 10 years. You have a situation where millennials and Gen Z have only ever seen, a life where they can't afford anything, and they can't afford a home, can't afford to, start a family. So having the liberals in power for the past 10 years and their inability to really live a proper life has, of course, led to the idea that we need change. Now, the conservatives, in my opinion, would deliver much worse change. Cuts to public services are not going to benefit Gen Z and millennials. That said, I understand the desire there for something different when the current situation has not helped them. But everybody else, especially 65 plus, are very worried about Donald Trump and those threats, and that is largely driving the liberal vote for those ages. Now, let's get to Abacus. I'll get to what they project in a bit here, but most important factors when deciding the vote. Reducing your cost of living is sitting at 45%. Dealing with Donald Trump and the impact of his decisions sitting at 30%. And making housing more affordable at 20%. So these three have really been, especially these top two, have been what has been driving the vote. And if we were in a situation where Trump didn't win the election, I think we would be looking at a clear majority, or at worst, a clear minority for the Conservative Party. But because Trump has thrown a wrench into the election, it's completely changed how people are feeling about where their vote's going to go. So, most important factors when deciding to vote by age. So, as I was saying, affordability, so reducing your cost of living. This is the biggest factor by far for the 18 to 29-year-olds. But it's also a big issue across the board for everyone. But dealing with Donald Trump is a major issue for those 60 and over, and that has led to largely their support for the Liberal Party. And of course, making housing more affordable, 35%, that's driving their vote for 18 to 29. And I would say Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives don't have any real plan to address housing. I've been pleasantly surprised by what Mark Carney has been offering on housing. Even, I would argue, better than what the NDP have been running on. So, if you're looking at the actual plans, and housing is your issue, I think Mark Carney has a clear advantage there. That said, that's where things stand. Impressions now. This also gets interesting because it may address a myth or two. Mark Carney, his impressions continue to remain positive, and they have done so throughout the campaign. Usually during a campaign, when people get to know you more, see you more often, it's just natural that voters tend to dislike the person more because there's more to scrutinize, more of a focus on, their record, who they are. And because of those sorts of, attack ads, that kind of thing, narratives that come out, it tends to narrow a bit. But in Mark Carney's case, he's been doing pretty well in terms of impressions. Compare that to Pierre Poilievre, and it's been all over the place. Now, the myth that I think is worth busting here is that Pierre Poilievre was, the reason why the Conservatives were doing so well before Mark Carney came in. You look at this, that's simply not the case. Pierre Poilievre was never popular. So the reason why the Liberals were doing so well, the reason why the Liberals were doing so poorly while Trudeau was Prime Minister was largely because of Trudeau and affordability, not because of Pierre Poilievre. Because once Mark Carney came in, there was just a massive shift. Once people actually began seeing Pierre Poilievre more often, you see a dramatic drop-off here in the feelings of positivity towards Pierre Poilievre, and that has really just sustained. It's gone up a little bit, but that gap has been there the entire time between negative and positive compared to Mark Carney, which is the inverse of that. Now, this gets to some of the fun questions that Abacus data proposed, and I love these. So first, we start with some normal stuff. Finding common ground to solve a dispute. So Mark Carney at a plus 12 there, standing up to a bully. Mark Carney at a plus 8. Of course, that works well with Trump. Helping you manage your household expenses. Mark Carney, plus 6. Sitting beside on a long flight. This is where we start to get weird. Mark Carney, plus 6. Which, can you imagine sitting beside Pierre Poilievre on a long flight? Oh, my goodness. Captaining a ship through a rough storm. All right. Mark Carney, plus 5. Hosting the best party. Not really sure why that's important, but Mark Carney, plus 1. Putting out a kitchen fire. Pierre Poilievre +2. I would love to know the reasoning behind some of these choices. I like that the don't know is kind of growing here as people are like, what kind of question is this? They're not even really responding. Putting up a shelf, Pierre Poilievre +6. I can't imagine why. Um, I attribute this completely due to his makeover over the past 2 years. You look at Pierre Poilievre, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, he looks very different than how he looks now. And there's been an intention to make Pierre Poilievre look more relatable, look more working class compared to who he was before. And that has apparently worked on some people. My answer to this would be I don't know, because who knows? Also, who cares? But some funny questions there. Impressions of Donald Trump. I think this is important to note for this election. Yeah. Negatives have just continued to increase and really have stabilized over the past month or so as there has been less about Trump. Though, as I went to record this video, there's a new Truth Social from Trump talking about Canada. I will see if I can fit that into a different video. But it has sustained the hatred of him at 77%. I don't know who these weird Canadians are. It's 11% that like Donald Trump, but there you are. And here is their projection. Final popular vote estimate. They're saying 41% for the Liberals, 39% for the Conservatives, and NDP sitting at 10%. All right. Let's get to the aggregate. This is CBC's poll tracker, brings in all the polls to create averages. This is their final result. Mark Carney and the Liberals are sitting at 42.8% of the vote. Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre sitting at 39.2% of the vote. This projects to a likely Liberal majority, having them hover around 189 seats. Worst case scenario for them is a minority. Best case scenario for the Conservatives is a minority, but they're hovering around 125. And they're writing here 70% probability of Liberals winning a majority, 19% probability of the Liberals winning the most seats but not a majority, 10% probability of Conservatives winning the most seats but not a majority, and 1% winning a majority. So their breakdown by province as well, very similar to what we saw from ECOS, with Ontario and Quebec and Atlantic Canada really doing the brunt of the work here for the Liberal Party. And you see over time how it's changed. Liberal support has come down a little bit over the past several weeks because it is natural in a campaign when there's more ads and attacks that it's going to have an impact, but it hasn't really changed the Liberals' fortune of a likely Liberal majority. So that is where we currently sit as of 11 a.m. Will things shift dramatically over the next few hours as people go out to vote? We're going to have to see. This is the, I'm not sure, did I do a video on this? I think I mentioned it in a recent video, but the highest turnout, record high turnout for a Canadian election, or I should say record high early vote turnout for a Canadian election, 7.8 million, 7.2 million Canadians have already voted, which is a 25% increase from the last election. So people are eager to come out and vote in this election. I can't wait to see the final totals on that. What percentage of Canadians came out to vote? I expect it to be a high percentage, largely, again, due to the situation that Canada currently is in with the threats from Donald Trump and the urgency that people feel with this election. So what are your thoughts on what the data currently is showing, and what do you expect to happen in this election? Let me know in the comments below.